Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the MotorCity mechanic. In today's video, we're going to be continuing with the series on replacing the valves in the cylinder head. Now this video is part 2 in the series. If you haven't watched part 1, I want you to stop right now. Scroll down into the description below this video. Find the link to part 1, click on it, watch it, then come back and check this video out. It'll make a whole lot more sense if you do it that way. Now the things that we're going to be taking on today are, we're going to be removing the old valve stem seals, we're going to clean the valves, we're going to work on lapping them, we're going to install new seals, and then we're going to install the valves, the valve springs, the keepers, and the retainers. So with that, let's go ahead and start where we left off last time. Now that we've got all the valves removed from the cylinder head, there's one more thing that we've got to take off before we start cleaning everything and beginning with the lapping of the valves, and that's the valve stem seals. Now what we have here is one of those valve stem seals. Now it has one job, and that's to prevent oil from getting into the intake, the exhaust, or the combustion chamber. Now what it does is it seals the shaft of the valve stem where it goes through the valve stem guide, and it's gently pressed onto the cylinder head. As you can see, we've got a metal sleeve right here, that's the main part of the body, and then we've got a rubber seal on top, and right at the top edge you'll see it, there's a metal spring that actually kind of keeps it sealed nice and tight up against the valve stem that protrudes through here. Now as that valve is moving up and down, the spring on the top of the seal is actually squeezing the rubber up against the shaft of the valve, and that's what's preventing the oil from working its way down. Now in some higher mileage vehicles that might be burning oil out the tailpipe, this is one possible cause of oil getting into the combustion chamber, and that's what we're going to be removing and replacing on the cylinder head. So if you look real closely where the valve spring was seated, you'll see that seal that I was talking about. We've got one right here on the left, and we've got one right here on the right, and that's what we're going to work on removing next. Now I'm going to give you a couple options for removing those valve stem seals. Now this is option 1, and it's going to be a cheap kit you can get off of Amazon. Now the price for this kit is $25, and it goes by a lot of different company names, which means it's made in China. It's one generic kit that everybody else puts their brand on. Now the thing that's cool about this kit is, not only can we use this tool right here for removing the valve stem seal, but we've got some guides and an installer for putting the valve stem seal back on the head without messing that seal up. So it's both a remover and an installer. Now like I mentioned, this is the first option I want to show you how to use, and then we're going to show you some other tools you can use for installing the valve stem seals as well, in case you don't want to buy something like this, because a kit like this you may only use once or twice. You're not going to use it often, but it's real convenient if you've got one to install it. It certainly makes the job a lot easier, and it doesn't damage the seal. Now the way that the tool in the kit works is, you're basically squeezing and clamping down on the body of the valve stem seal. It's got a serrated end on here so it can actually grip it and bite down on it. So what you do is you actually just slide it over the body and you squeeze tight. And I'm going to show you on the head how you actually rotate it and pull it off. Now if you don't have a tool like this, I'm going to give you another option, and that's a set of needle nose pliers, mainly the ones that's got the 90-degree bends on the end. Either one of these will work fine. This tool is great for installing and removing the seals, but if you don't have one, reach in your toolbox, grab your long needle nose pliers, and they'll work fine for removing that valve stem seal. So let's go ahead and grab the one tool that pretty much everybody has, or you can get at your local parts store, and that's those needle nose pliers. So grab the metal body of the valve stem seal with the open end of the needle nose pliers, and what you want to do is squeeze tight, and you want to twist clockwise, counterclockwise, at the same time trying to pull up until you've got it removed. So now that I showed you how to use the needle nose pliers to remove it, let's go ahead and grab that tool that came in that kit that we just showed you. So place the end of the tool around the body of the seal, and what we're going to do is squeeze tight, and we're going to try to rotate it just like we did with the needle nose pliers, and at the same time try to pull up and remove it. So now we've got everything removed from the cylinder head that needs to come off. The next step we're going to be doing is cleaning the valves, because we got to clean them before we can lap them. And mainly what we're doing is removing any kind of rust or carbon buildup. As you can see, there's only a little bit on here. Now, had this been a direct injection engine, you would certainly see a lot more carbon in this area. I'm going to show you a simple way to do this that doesn't require any special tools. So that way we can clean it from this to this. Now, all we need is a little bit of effort. Now, the items that you're going to need for cleaning all those valves is going to be a cordless drill and a 3M very fine hand sanding pad. So the process is this. We're going to be chucking up the valve into that cordless drill, and then we're going to spin it. As we're spinning it, we're going to use a sanding pad, and we're going to hold it in different places until we get all the buildup removed. We're just going to repeat this till it's got a nice little polish to it. So first thing is, insert it into the cordless drill and chuck it up. Now grab that pad, wrap it around the valve, and start moving it back and forth. And as you can see, as we go, we're going to start removing some of that rust buildup and what little bit of carbon we had. We've only done this for a couple of seconds, and as you can see, there is a big difference already. So all we're going to do is just repeat this a little bit longer till we remove all that buildup. So the total time we spent cleaning this valve was less than a minute. And as you can see, we have no more carbon or rust buildup on either end of it. So at this point, all we've got to do is repeat the same procedure for the rest of the valves. So at this point, we're ready to start lapping the valves. Now, lapping is a process that you go through where you try to match the contact surface between the valve and the hardened steel seat that's pressed into the cylinder head. We're trying to get a nice tight seal so that we don't have any pressure loss. Any kind of pressure losses past the exhaust or the intake valve can eventually cause a burnt valve, which then leads to a misfire. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to match the two surfaces up. Now the way we're doing that is we're using an abrasive compound. We're going to put it on the head of the valve, we're going to insert the valve, and then we're going to spin it inside the bore. And that abrasive compound is going to make a matching surface. And we're going to look at that surface and we're going to continue doing it till we get a nice uniform pattern. Now the compound that we're going to be using for lapping the valves is something that you might find at your local auto parts store. If not, definitely check on Amazon because they're going to have it for sure. The compound is nothing more than basically a petroleum-based product with some abrasive material in there. You might be able to find it in different grits, just like sandpaper. The more common ones are 120 and 280. So if you go that route, you're going to start with the more abrasive one, 120. Once you get the lapping process down, you're going to follow it back up with the 280. The other option is to go with something like this. This is more of a universal one-size-fits-all. It'll do the exact same thing and you won't have no problems. And that's what we're going to be using in this video. So let me jump in here and interrupt real fast. What I was about to do is show you different techniques for lapping the valves. But the more that I think about it, the more that I think that that would be doing you an injustice. Because what works great for me probably doesn't work great for technician A and probably doesn't work good for technician B. And you know what? We'd probably argue back and forth in the comments below about this isn't the right way, this causes damage to that. But you know what? There's one thing we would agree on, and that's what we call the old school method. It's the way that they were lapping valves when the first engine was built. So that's what I want to do. For those that have never done this before, we're going to be using that old school method. And I want to show you how to do it. It doesn't involve a lot, and it's very hands-on. So with that, let's go ahead and get back to it. Now, being that we're going to be using the old school method for lapping the valves, you still got to get your hands on some special tools to accomplish this. Now these are what they call valve lappers. Obviously they're double-ended and they come in different sizes. They might be made out of wood, they might be made out of plastic, but nonetheless they all do the exact same thing. And the reason for the different size suction cups on both ends is for the different size valves. Obviously the intake valves are going to be larger while the exhaust valves will be smaller. Now the way that it works is you need to find out which one of these suction cups fits best inside this area of the valve. Now what I found is typically the larger ones don't seal as well as the smaller ones, so you need to play around and see what works best for you. So what I found on this intake valve is the best suction cup was the next to the smallest size. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the surface is nice and clean. You grab the suction cup, press it up against nice and tight, and squeeze the air out. You want to make sure it stays on there, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be rotating this handle back and forth, and that means we're going to be rotating the valve as well. We don't want the tool to keep coming off, so that's why you play around the different sizes till you find something that seals good. And like I said, also make sure that the surface is nice and clean. Another thing you're going to find out is the cheaper tools you buy, the less likely they're going to seal well. Because that's the issue with this method here that we're using. You're going to fight this constantly about the tool coming off. That's just the nature of the beast. If you watch any other videos, you'll see the same thing. You're constantly reinstalling the tool. But in the end, it's kind of one of the best methods, especially for starting out if you're lapping valves. Now, one of the important steps in lapping valves is to keep the valve stem guide and the valve properly lubricated as we're going in and out and as we're rotating it during the lapping process. Now the way you do that is you get an oil squirt can like this, fill it up with some oil, and what we're going to do is we're going to apply a little bit of oil down to the valve stem guide and on the valve as we're installing it. So now we're ready to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get some of this valve grinding compound. We're going to put it on the contact surface of the valve here. Just squeeze some out, go around the outer edge. Apply you a nice little bead of it. Doesn't hurt if you get too much. Over time we're going to be wiping it off and applying some new as we go. Now just take care when you're installing the valve and the valve stem not to wipe off all the lapping compound. Grab it by the shaft or the stem and press it down in there. So now that we've got the valve inserted with that lapping compound on it, next thing we're going to do is install the lapping tool. Remember earlier we picked out what size suction cup worked best for that valve. So all we got to do now is press it down on the end, squeeze all the air out, make sure we got a nice tight seal. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spinning this back and forth just like this. We're going to go clockwise, we're going to go counterclockwise. We're going to go back and forth till we hear the difference in the sound that the compound's making. And what I'll do is I'll move the microphone so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the reason why I recommend this method to all the beginners, because that sound is telling you everything you need to know. So now we're going to grab both hands and we're going to squeeze the tool between them. One hand's going to go up, one's going to go down. And we're going to do this motion back and forth. I usually start at the top and work my way down. By doing that, I'm applying some downward force at the same time that I'm rotating the valve. And then the lapping compound is what's going to do the grinding to match the seat and the valve. Now pay attention to the sound, because initially it's going to sound very coarse or very rough. As you keep doing this, the pitch is going to change. It's almost going to get more of a higher pitch. And what you do from time to time is you'll lift the tool up and then seat it back down. And what that does is any of the compound that got spreaded out, as you lift it up, gets pulled back in, you lower the tool, you repeat the process. We'll do this a few times, and then eventually we'll take the tool back off, clean everything, and repeat again once we apply some more lapping compound. And what we're looking for is a nice solid line where you can see around the valve and that valve seat to make sure that there's good contact between the two and that everything seals up well. Now after you've done this for a while and everything starts sounding different, what I recommend doing is removing that valve. We want to clean everything off. And what we're going to be paying attention to is that contact surface, that area that the valve meets that valve stem seat, and see what kind of pattern we have. Now I'll start with wiping it off with a rag, and then what I'll do is I'll follow up with some brake clean afterwards. So just hit everything off, go through, make sure you clean everything real nice and good. And same thing with the valve. We'll grab it, we'll hit it with some brake clean. So now we've got all the lapping compound removed from the valve seat, we're going to do our inspection. What we're looking for is this gray area right here. That's the contact surface between the valve and the valve seat. That's where all that lapping action was going on, all that grinding that we heard. As you can see, it made a nice pattern all the way around. This is what we want to look for, a nice solid line. If there are any kind of gaps or pits in the surface, all we would do is repeat the process. We put more lapping compound on the valve, reinstall it with a squirt of oil as well, and we'd keep lapping, and then we'd clean it and recheck it until we got a pattern just like this. Now, just because the valve seat looks good doesn't mean that we're done. We need to go ahead and clean and inspect the valve as well. So now once we've got all that lapping compound removed from the valve, we're going to be inspecting the same thing as what we did on the valve seat. We're going to be looking at that contact area, and we want to make sure we have that same uniform line all the way around the perimeter. Remember, no pits, no gaps. Now once you've got a pattern that you're happy with on both the valve and the valve seat, you're basically going to be repeating this over and over and over again. You're going to do all the intake valves, and you're going to come back and do all the exhaust valves. And once you're done with that, you're going to have to thoroughly clean the cylinder head, because you don't want any of the old lapping compound anywhere, because it can cause damage. So you're going to be using some rags, brake clean, compressed air if you've got it. We need everything spotless. And once we're done with that, we're going to move over to the next step, which is going to be installing the valve stem seals. Now as you finish lapping each one of the valves, you need to make sure you keep up where it went on the cylinder head. If you remember in part 1 of this series, I showed you how you can buy some inexpensive muffin tins to do just that. Now when it comes to installing the valve stem seal, I'm going to show you 2 different ways you can do that. The first one's going to be using this kit that we used in the beginning. It's got that tool right here that we use for removing the valve stem seal. The other half of the tool is for installing it. Now in order to do that, we've got to find out which one of these tools right here fits inside the valve stem guide. So we're just going to pick each one, slide it down in there, and make sure we get a nice tight fit. At that point, we're going to screw it onto the handle. So what I've done is I've randomly grabbed one of those adapters. So what we're going to do is see if it fits. If it's too small, we'll go to the next largest size. If it's too large, we'll go down a size. So all we're going to do is insert it in that valve stem guide. And once it's inserted, I'm just going to grab it and I'm going to wiggle it back and forth. As you can see, we've got excessive play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the next larger size. And we'll do the exact same thing. We'll insert it into the guide. Make sure it's fully seated. We'll grab the end. We'll try to wiggle it. We can spin it, but we don't get any side-to-side movement. So this is the one that we're going to be threading onto the handle. So if you look real close to the tool, you'll see that we've got a flat area right here, and towards the center we've got a recessed area. All of this corresponds to the valve stem seal. Right here at the top we've got the rubber portion that does all the sealing, and we've got a spring that keeps it nice and tight up against the valve stem. We don't want to damage that. We want to be using the body of the valve stem seal when we're tapping it in place. So when you install it on the tool, you can see that the rubber and the spring go inside that recessed area. So when you start tapping on this with a dead blow hammer, we're going to be hitting on the body, not the rubber, so it doesn't cause any damage. So now we're ready to go ahead and insert the end of this tool inside that valve stem guide. That pin right there is what's going to keep everything perfectly in line as we tap the seal in place. And then just carefully line everything up as you're installing the tool. Now with one hand we're going to be supporting the tool, the other one we're going to get a dead blow hammer and give it a couple gentle taps. Once you hear that tingy sound, you know that you've got it fully seated, and all we got to do now is remove the tool and move over to the next valve stem seal. So I've showed you how to install the valve stem seal using that special tool kit. Now if you remember, I mentioned that there's 2 different ways that you can do this. Now the method I'm getting ready to show you is something some people may not agree with, but I have found out that it works great for me. Now what I do is I grab a socket. Remember, we don't want to damage the seal on the end of it. Now the metal body right here is what we're going to be applying force to as we tap it down onto the valve stem guide. So I find me a socket that fits around it and makes contact with the base. I grab an extension, install it, and that basically is the same thing as the adapter and the handle in that special tool kit. So that's the method that we're going to be using next. So the biggest difference with using the socket method is we have nothing to line it up with. So we're having to do it physically ourselves. I also don't have anything to hold the seal. So what I've got to do is I've got to sit the seal in place. Just sit it over the valve stem guide, get it kind of squared up. Then I'll grab that socket and extension and slide it on top. And just like before, we're going to use one hand to hold on to the extension. We're going to try to square up that seal to make sure everything's nice and straight. Grab our dead blow hammer and give it a few taps. Once again, when you hear that kind of metal to metal sound, that tingy sound, you know that the seal is completely seated. Once you're finished lapping all the valves and installing all the valve stem seals, it's time to start installing the valve springs, the retaining plates, and the keepers. Now the installation is just the opposite of removal. If you watch part 1, we went kind of in depth and we showed you different tools for removing them. You'll be using those same exact tools for reinstalling them. And I want to point out something here that's going to help you along the way, specifically when it comes to the keepers. Now looking at the end of the valve, you'll see that we've got a series of grooves machined into it. On some engines there may be 2. This particular engine, obviously we have 3. It's those grooves that the keepers line up with. Now there's 2 keepers per valve. Just line it up, install one, install the other, and then they slide into that retaining plate. And that's what keeps the valve spring in place. Now the problem you run into is these things are very small, so they're easy to lose. And that tip I'm about to show you is to help to prevent that. Now the first thing you need to do is you need to get your hands on some wheel bearing grease, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to apply a little bit of grease either to the grooves up here on the valve itself or on the keeper. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep it in place as we're working on it. So just reach in, grab a little bit, we're going to smear it on the valve. We're going to get it down in the grooves. Now you can go ahead and remove all the excess. Now when we install the keeper, it doesn't want to fall off. So let's go ahead and do the same thing again. We'll get us some grease. Put it on the end of the valve, make sure we got some in the grooves. Kind of wipe the excess off. Now let's go ahead and insert it into the head. Now if the grease on the end of the valve, all we're going to do is give a little squirt of oil, kind of lube things up as it goes through that valve stem guide and seal. And we're going to insert the valve for the final time. And once that valve spring is fully seated, grab your valve spring, sit it on top, then grab that retaining plate and line it up. Then grab that same valve spring compressor that you used initially for taking everything apart, install it, and thread it down, making sure that everything stays in line as you're tightening it down. What we want to do is we want to continue until we see those 3 grooves that the keepers are going to lock onto. So start tightening and keep going. There's 1. You can see the 2nd. We'll keep on until we get past that 3rd. Now if the tool rotates into a position that you can't really get access to it, just keep going a little bit further until it lines up to where you got room. Now when it comes time to installing the keepers, depending on the vehicle you're working on, you might have easy access or it might be difficult to get into the valve spring so you can actually install this. One thing that might help is a retractable pocket magnet just like this one. This is going to give me a little access to get in some deeper places. Along with a flat tip screwdriver, this is what we're going to be using to install it. So using that pocket magnet, I'm going to get down in here and I'll put the keeper on the valve. Now the flat tip screwdriver, the reason for that is I need to be able to pull the magnet off and keep the keeper where it needs to be. So once you got it in place, pull back, and now it stays. Now we've got to get that keeper spun around because we got to get access so we can install the second one. Once again, that's where this flat tip screwdriver comes in. I'll gently just kind of persuade it around. Remember the grease is keeping it in place. Plus if I need to, I can reach around from the back side and tuck it up against the valve again. And we'll do the exact same thing for the other keeper. Put the magnet right there to keep it in place, grab our flat tip screwdriver, press it against the valve, and then we'll pull the magnet off. So now that we got both of the keepers in place, we can go ahead and back off on the valve spring compressor. What that's going to do is allow the valve spring and the retaining plate to come up. Once they come up to a certain height, they're going to capture the keepers, and at that point, everything's locked in place. Continue backing the spring compressor all the way off. And you can go ahead and remove it from the cylinder head. So that brings us to the end of the series on replacing the valves in the cylinder head. Now hopefully you learned something new today, something that you can take with you, give you a little bit of confidence if you've ever got to take this job on for the first time. That way you end up with a good quality repair. If you liked the video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you got any comments or suggestions about anything you saw in today's video, or anything Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram related, you can either leave a comment below or you can email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com. Also, if you'd like to shop on Amazon, make sure to scroll down into the description below this video and find the Amazon link there, because anything that you buy will help support this channel. Once again, everybody, thanks for watching.